those thoughts were coming up for me, and again, this is what I loved about having a partner during the experience. We were literally talking about this. I said to my brother, like 4 years ago, I would have never been able to do something like this. And that's because I was in a headspace, forget the physicality piece of it. I was just in a headspace in my life where I had left my relationship, quit my job, moved back home. It was in the middle of COVID. I did completely stop training. I was extremely burnt out and I was in a really negative headspace. And if you had said to me, hey, we're going to go do this race, I would have said up and down, absolutely not. I refuse to do it. There's no way I'm going to do it.
Let's link up with Krysta on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hey there, FYX listeners. Welcome back to our latest episode of the FYX podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and we've got some life updates for this week's episode. Those of you who follow me on Instagram know that I participated in a race this weekend called HYROX, and I had a lot of you asking me about it. If you follow any other fitness professionals, fitness enthusiasts, anybody who loves to work out, especially if you're somebody who does boot camp style classes, is into group fitness, that sort of thing, I am sure over the last few days, if not this past weekend, your Instagram was flooded like mine with reels, stories, videos, photos of people participating in this HYROX event. And having experienced it firsthand, I figured let's record a podcast about it, get the questions answered, and give you guys my honest take. I am recording this one day after the race, and let me just say this. I feel better than I expected to, and I'm going to explain kind of what went on during the race, what was included, all that. But it's definitely one of those days where you're reminded what it feels like to be new to working out. It's the whole, you bend over to pick something up that you dropped on the ground and you like feel it and your hamstrings are really sore, or you sit down in like a squat position and you're reminded of all the work you did the day before. And I gotta say, I kind of like that feeling. Now, hear me out. Part of the reason why I like that feeling is because as someone who has been training for years, it's been a pretty long time since I felt that level of soreness, and that's totally normal. So often people are expecting that the intensity that's going to get them the best results from training is that stimulus, that consequence, if you will, of feeling super, super sore after the workout every single time. That's not actually what you want. And it becomes harder and harder to achieve as somebody who is more experienced in their training. But it is a nice little reminder of like, hey, you push your body really hard, because that is what that feedback is telling you. When you don't get that feedback, when you don't have that sensation, it doesn't mean that you didn't push yourself hard enough. And take that from somebody who prides themselves on being strong, lifting heavy, pushing themselves in the gym with every set. And it is rare that I feel this way. The reason why I feel this way today, as I'm recording this episode, is because it's been a long time since I've done a lot of the movement patterns that were included in the race back to back like that. But more importantly, it was because there was running in the mix. And if you know me, you know that I wouldn't classify myself as much of a runner girl. So that was definitely something that I knew would feel different for me the day after. I did run a 5-mile race last weekend, and I did a funny reel about this, about the fact that my brother just simply signed me up for it and roped me into it. And I'm going to be honest, this HYROX event was actually the same exact thing. I have thought about it before because a lot of what's included in it are functional movements that I do really enjoy and am used to training from my experience in group fitness as both a participant and an instructor in the past. But this was definitely different with the running in the mix and the fact that it was outside, which I will also get into as I kind of recap this. But I thought how I was feeling today was just a nice opportunity to be able to share with you, the listener, that if you're somebody who's questioning, if you're pushing yourself enough, if you're training at the capacity with which you know you're capable of, I get this question a lot. Like, did the workout count? Was it as effective? We also work with a lot of people who are, let's say, recovering from the thought process that every single training session needs to leave them feeling dead on the floor. And this is just my reminder to you that that is not necessary in order to achieve changes to the way you look, to the way you feel, to how your clothes fit, to your confidence, to your energy levels, all of it. Now, why did we decide to do this race? Other than the fact that, yes, my brothers roped me into it. So I competed with my younger brother, and we were just kind of like, let's see if we can set a goal to work towards something. And I thought it was really cool that both of them kind of came to me and said, hey, we want to do this. Do you want to do this with us? Because as somebody who does have a nutrition coach in their life, and as somebody who set a goal for herself back in December to make 2024 the year that I focused on fat loss for myself and really just focused on practicing everything that we preach inside of the Fitness Fix, I already kind of felt like I had a goal set for the year. And to be totally honest, I was a little bit nervous about trying to balance out those specific fat loss goals with training for something like this. And that's also a really important distinction to make, is the fact that the way we set up our goals, if we want to get the end goal usually as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, feel really good about those results, our fitness and our nutrition are best off being aligned. Now, that was somewhat of a balancing act for me over the course of the past few months. And that's because this style of training that's included in a race like this one, I would encourage somebody to make sure that they were eating quite a good bit of carbohydrates and plenty of protein. You know that I am covered on the protein front. I will never shut up about how consistent I am with my protein intake and how much I love it. So I was good to go there. But I did have a few conversations with my nutrition coach about really trying to make sure we kept our carbohydrate intake up, because I was training in a way where I wanted to make sure I had that energy. If you want a good analogy of how to think about carbohydrates, I always say to clients, think about them like the fuel that you're putting in your car. And instead of driving, what we're talking about here is your body getting through training. So if you're somebody who is lifting heavy, pushing themselves in the gym, we want to make sure that we are actually having adequate carbohydrates, even when our goal is fat loss. Can we manipulate carbohydrates to be able to see movement on the scale and lose fat? Yes. But it's not always this game of let's pull our carbohydrates down as low as possible. We want to see what your body responds to. The more muscle you have, usually you are somebody who does better with higher carbohydrate intake, because the implication is that if you do have more muscle, then that probably means you have a history of training intentionally, not just harder, but intentionally to build strength and put on muscle. And if we don't have any gas in the car, think about it. Like when that light goes off that you only got a few miles left to go, if you're operating like that at all times, where you only have like 10 gallons, if you only have a few gallons left in your tank, as opposed to something like 10 plus gallons, depending on what kind of car you're driving, well, you are not going to be able to put on that muscle. And ultimately, if you go through some kind of fat loss phase in that position, you may get that end result of, hey, I look smaller and the scale is lower, like the actual number is, but I don't necessarily feel like I look like I work out. That is why inside of the Fitness Fix, we go through phases where we really prioritize increasing your calories and focus on the way that you're training inside of the gym. Now, again, none of that has anything specific to do with the race, but I bring this up for context because it's really important. You're just leaving things on the table if we don't have conversations about different things that you are trying to accomplish, because different goals are going to have different inputs. And as I was sitting here today reflecting on just this weekend as a whole, as a nutrition coach, as a personal trainer, looking back on my fitness levels over the past year, 2 years, 4+ years ago, even 10+ years ago, I started thinking about our clients too. And something that was a really cool moment for me was the fact that I had a client and one of our team members, shout out to Claire, who also participated in the HYROX event this weekend. I had another client who I've been working with for almost 2 years celebrate her wedding. And that was like the big culmination of all of the work that we've been doing together. in the last 20 months, and knowing that she was walking into her big day feeling her best ever was so cool. And then I had other clients just messaging me about really great wins for themselves, just discoveries about themselves. Like, hey, I went to the doctor, had a conversation with them about my blood work, and one of my new goals is to see my cholesterol and triglycerides lowered. Amazing. I am so excited to have the opportunity to support that client. Had another client message me telling me that she was trying on a dress that she couldn't fit into in the last 3 years, and it looked fantastic on her. And she said to me, I feel so proud of myself. Then we have myself and Claire going out to this race and being like, hey, let's go do it. Let's see what happens. And it was just this really cool opportunity for me to be like, wow, look at all of the diversity of the different types of goals that we have inside of the Fitness Fix and how we're able to support each of these women in achieving those things. But it all comes back to one central theme, and that is you making you number one in your life, you prioritizing yourself, and second to that, but most importantly, feeling good while doing it and knowing that that is possible. And feeling good can look like seeing those improved blood markers, looking your best in that outfit that you kind of put to the back of your closet and you've said to yourself like, oh, I can't wear this right now. Or feeling your absolute best on one of the most important days of your life where you are the center of attention at your wedding. And of course, feeling good could also mean getting through this race that definitely took a toll on us because the heat was no joke. Now, let me set the scene for you guys. So here's what's included in the event. I got my notes next to me. I did a little math for you because all of this is in meters and kilograms. And I wanted to give you the visual in terms of like yards, football fields, pounds, for those of you who are more used to that. So here's how this goes. My brother and I did it as partners. So we were in the mixed doubles heats. And our older brother also did it with a partner, but it was another male partner. So they were in the all men's heats, and they actually use the same weight as us. So if you were a female who enters this race and your partner is male, you automatically get kicked up there to lift that heavier weight. And I have to tell you, one of my big takeaways from this was I did not have any concerns, didn't think twice about the weight that was used in some of these movements because that's just how I already trained. That was honestly the easy part. The running part was what really got me. So here's how this goes. You have a total of 8 kilometers that you need to run, which is like just under 5 miles. It's like 4.9 something. And the way those runs are set up is they're 1,000 meters mixed into this functional course. And it almost looks like an obstacle course, but it's not because you actually run on the outside. And essentially you're running this 1,000 meters, 1 kilometer, and it works out to be about 0.6 miles. So think just a little bit over a half mile. And it's kind of like your cash in and cash out, if you will. So you start the race by running the 0.6 miles. And then you go to your first station. And each of these stations are a total of 8. They're made up of different functional movements. After you complete that station, you cash out and go back out and run the 0.6 miles again. And you do that for a total of 8 times until you've completed all the stations. So you start with a run, you hit a station, you run again, you hit a station, you run again, and so on and so forth until you get to station number 8. And here's what's included at each of these stations. So the first one was 1,000 meters on the ski erg. And my brother and I just split that up. We each hit about 500 meters, give or take. Maybe I went a little bit less than that. I don't even remember because it was the first one. But we were like, okay, let's just try to minimize how many times we switch because we want to be efficient. And the only thing I was thinking about that entire time was like, okay, you're good at things like skiing. There's also rowing in this race. I knew I was good at those types of movements, but don't get too excited with your adrenaline and go out too fast. It was hard not to, but we really did try to pace ourselves. So we would hit that ski, get out of the little obstacle course area, and then run the laps that we had to come right back in. Next one was a sled push. And this was 12.5 meters 4 times. So you go down and back, down and back. And that basically works out to think about it like half of a football field. And we were pushing 335 pounds. So all the squats, the deadlifts, the leg presses, upper body work that we prioritize regularly in the gym. I was putting it to use there. And honestly, that part was really fun. I was just in my head thinking, how badass is it that I have no concerns about pushing this 335-pound sled? Did we have to dig for it? Hell yeah. But that was one of those times that I was like, this is why I'm thankful for how much, especially as a woman, I prioritize strength training. And ladies, this is your reminder to not be afraid of weight, because the ability to complete that station gives me the same confidence that I get off of putting on a dress that maybe hasn't fit me in a while, or stepping on the scale and seeing the number go down. It's just another measure of things that can add to our confidence. And for me personally, feeling strong is something that I really value, because it gives you the ability to be like, hell yeah, I did that. From there, we ran again. We came back in. This time had a sled pull, same distance. It was 12.5 meters, 4 times. And this was a little lighter. The sled itself worked out to about 227 pounds. So again, still pretty heavy. I felt like the pull was a little harder than the push. And I will say I'm feeling that in my upper body a little bit more today. If I could go back and kind of re-strategize how I would approach that, I probably would use a little bit more of my legs. But coming off what was already now over a mile run at this point, with our second set of runs already under our belts, I was like, okay, my legs could use a little bit of a break right now too. And for the most part, on some of these, my brother, actually, I'll give him a shout out because he deserves it, carried the team a little bit more. We didn't split both of those 50-50. We did split the pulls 50-50, but he did go for an extra little bit on the sled push for me, which was very helpful. Now, by this point, the heat was a big factor. So our race heat time was like 12:50. So it was like right in the middle of the day. And a lot of HYROX events, most HYROX events, are held inside. This one was at Pier 76 in New York City. It was a gorgeous day. I was right on the water. And I have some thoughts about that too. But when I tell you it was so hot, I was not prepared for this heat. I was hydrated. Shout out to the people over at Element. I was taking my packets, loading up on that salt all the day before the race, the 2 days before the race. But I don't think there was any amount of water that I could have drank to have prepared me for this level of heat. Because by the time we got off the sleds, did the sled push, ran again, did the sled pull, ran again, I started saying to my brother, hey, I am like feeling a little bit like I am lightheaded. And let's talk nutrition. What did I do before the race? I had plenty of protein. I had my eggs and egg whites for breakfast. I did not skip out on my carbs. I had fruit. I had toast. I was ready to go. But I was starting to feel like, wow, I know that I have a lot left to run outside of these functional movement stations that are still ahead in this race. So I want to be conservative in the pace that we were running. And this was the part where the mental aspect immediately took over. And he said to me, just one foot in front of the other, we got it. We stopped to grab water. Yes, there was some walking thrown into the mix, but this early in the race, I kept telling myself, I want to get through as much as I can running. Like that was the commitment we had made for ourselves. And by the way, one of the requirements of this race, when you do it with a partner, you and your partner can't separate during the run. You can only be like an arm's distance away from them during the run. So it's important that if one person can run a little bit faster than the other, they can't just like speed ahead. You have to do it collectively as a team. And that's an aspect of it that I think is such a cool rule, because for anybody who does this by themselves, I give so much credit, because it was really having a teammate there, somebody to talk to and just be like, hey, we got this, certainly helped in terms of saying like, our goal is just to finish right now and get through this and do it. And that's another comment I have on events like these themselves. It really brought me back to being a high school athlete. I was a swimmer, for those of you who don't know that. And even this was like a different experience level than swimming in terms of having a crowd, because when I was swimming, I could actually never hear anyone. Like you'd turn your head in the pool when you were going to take a breath, and it would just be like the roar of people in the stands on the pool deck, but you couldn't see anyone. And it was actually very quiet in the water. You could hear nothing but like your arms and legs moving through the pool. And then you'd have this like mostly silence during your entire race. Take that breath and these like waves of roars and cheers, and then you go right back into that silence. So I don't have as much experience as an athlete with the crowds and the adrenaline that came from that. And I think that's so fun. And it was a really, really great motivator as a part of the race, because there are people on the sidelines and very close to you cheering you on, people holding up signs, cheering for their friends, people in matching gear. It's a very raw, cool experience. So I know a lot of you out there, as I mentioned earlier, are people who are people who take group fitness classes. And if you like the fact that group fitness classes are that community and camaraderie type feel, then the HYROX race is one that you would also enjoy too, because it definitely mimics that, especially because the fans can actually get so close and literally be right next to you and cheering you on, let alone the fact that you have a bunch of other people. There are probably like 45 to 50 people in our heat, but you're never alone at any point in this race. The New York City event was one of the biggest ones in the race's history, with over 5,500 people signed up, and that doesn't even include the spectators. So there was a lot happening, which also probably contributed to the heat, because it was definitely a very tight space for how many people were included, and, get a lot of bodies together in one area. And that was just something I don't know that there would have been any other way to prepare for, other than to probably train outside in the heat. But we're only in early June, so there's only so much we could have done with that living in New Jersey. And the past few months of training for this, it wasn't like it was super warm outside anyways. So hopefully next time, because I do plan to do something like this again, it will be inside, because they usually are inside, but cool experience nonetheless. So back into the race itself. From there, did the sled pull, ran again. Next one, we had some burpee broad jumps. And again, we did not split this one 50-50. It was more just like a you go, I go sort of thing, where my brother did as many as he could, and he got down way more than I did in terms of the length. It was 80 meters, which is like, think of it as a little shorter than a football field, to give you that visual. So we probably split that like 60-40, let's say. But my dad did give us a compliment that our burpees looked pretty clean, and we were really hitting our push-ups and jumping right back up. I honestly don't remember getting through that, other than to just say, okay, I know this is one of the harder ones, because it required a lot of lower body, and just the up and down of the exercise with how hot it was really starting to get to my head. So I was like, okay, let's just finish this one. And then by this point, we were coming up on halfway through, and that's when I was starting to feel like, all right, these runs are really going to get to me. But I started communicating that to my brother. And so one of the biggest takeaways that I have from this race, again, is like, it's really awesome to be able to do with a partner, but also communication is key in being successful with it, the same way it is in any relationship that you have. When you want to get the most out of something, let's take nutrition coaching as an example, because obviously that's our bread and butter here. Our clients who have the most success are the ones who are talking to us the most often. And 9 times out of 10, people who are trying to go it alone when it comes to achieving certain fat loss goals, achieving certain strength goals, accomplishing races like this one, when you don't necessarily have somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody to talk to when you're lacking consistency, that's where you fall short. That's where you're not able to get to where you want to go. And that really ultimately becomes the value of working with a coach, and having that person in your corner to say, hey, here's what I'm struggling with. Hey, here's what happened this weekend. That's such a big one for all of our Fitness Fix clients. Events pop up, things go on. It's easier to quote unquote fall off your plans with what you were going to eat and the meals you were going to consider having. And what do? You come back to our coaching staff and say, hey, here's what happened. How can we better handle this next time? The more you communicate about those things, while you're putting yourself in a better position to talk to someone who has likely experienced how to be consistent with that, has likely struggled with it, or maybe even does continue to struggle with it. I have my weekends. If you're not a stranger to this show, you've heard me talk about it in other episodes before. Even in the last couple of weekends, like it was Memorial Day, there's birthday. My birthday was the month before that, or in May. It's very easy to have reasons why you may not maintain the exact structure of whatever it is that you intend to do with your nutrition as laid out by a coach or even by a macro calculator. If it were as simple as somebody handing you a set of macros, then there would be no need for coaching. And I wish it could be as easy as just somebody saying, hey, here are the macros you need to follow, go do it. But that's just not life. And that's something else that I also learned from thinking about this race too, in reviewing the guidelines and reviewing other people's experiences. You could go in there and you could have a strategy and you could have a plan for how you were going to pace certain runs, time things out with your partner, know when to switch. And I can say, and even just reading other people's accounts and their experiences from this specific event, the heat alone was a big factor in why even the best laid plans can totally change. So we got through our burpees, and then from there we ran again. And then we went into 1,000 meters on the rower, which once again reminded me of how happy I am that I have put so much effort in the last, I'd say like 2 years, if not the last year, very intentionally to training with the intention of focusing on that mind muscle connection and building strength, because the endurance that I had to row and ski, I was putting up numbers on those pieces of equipment in terms of my strokes per minute that I didn't expect to have, having just run the mileage that we did. And also the fact that it was hot and just not necessarily doing all of those exercises all the time the way that I used to. So it was just a really cool testament for me to be like, hey, like having muscle was such a good an investment and will always be such a good an investment. And then from there, we ran again, farmer's carry. The farmer's carry, we were using 20 kilogram kettlebells, so one in each hand, which is the equivalent of like 52 pounds, so a little over 50 pounds. And that one went by pretty quick, actually. I would say it was one of the faster ones. We were like, all right, just pick up these kettlebells and let's just go. And then the last two were the ones where we really had to dig. Sandbag lunges with a 20, or sorry, that one was 20 kilograms. The farmer's carry was 24 kilograms for 52 pounds. But the sandbag lunges, that one, it was all legs. And by this point, we were close to running almost 5 miles, remember? So that one was all mental. The back knee had to hit the ground every step. It was key to just only stop between your, not to stop between your reps, and to only stop when you were switching that sandbag with your partner. Finished that one out, looked at my brother, and he was like, let's commit to running this entire last, it was about 2 laps every single time to get to the 0.6 miles. Now, I will backtrack and say that by the time we got to like the 4th set of laps, the 4th run that we were doing, we did start to mix in walking, because as mentioned, it was required in the race to be an arm's distance away from your partner that whole time. And for me mentally, I said to myself at this point, I'm like, okay, I want to be able to get through the rest of the race. I don't want to feel like I'm going to pass out. And I had originally committed in my head, we committed together to saying, let's, whatever we do, we're not going to walk. And I got to a point where I was just like, I need to listen to my body, and this is what my body needs right now. And the biggest thing that I noticed was how high my heart rate would get up on a lot of the functional movements. And then you just don't really have that much time to recover. Even with switching things out with your partner and taking that little bit of a break, my heart rate was still so high during that time that I got to a point where I was like, okay, if my heart rate is this high, then I can do all the breathing in the world, but it just wasn't necessarily getting to a point where it was coming back down for me to feel like I could keep going on those runs. So basically what we did, and now Bean is joining us for the podcast. Hello, Bean. Is we got ourselves to strategize on running the straights and kind of like walking through some of the curves, or vice versa. And for me, that just gave me the ability to be able to mentally break up the run. Instead of saying, okay, you've got these 2 laps that you need to get through, it was just giving myself these like little sprints to be able to move through and say, okay, I'm going to run as far as I can. And kept hearing my brother say to me, just remember, it's 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other the entire time. And ultimately, we got to the very last station, which is 100 wall balls. So you're sitting in a squat and then taking a ball and throwing up it against a target. We had to complete a total of 100 together. So we split it up. we were switching like every 25. And then as we got to like rep 50 plus, he kept carrying us through and went to almost like 90. So he did like 40 in his second set. I finished out the last 10. We ran across that finish line and we did it. It took us just over an hour and a half. And let me tell you, it felt like a lot longer than that. Again, likely because of the heat and everything else that was just things that were unanticipated by being a part of the race, but ultimately a really cool experience. And one of the biggest things that I can sit here and say about it now is doing it and knowing what it was like and now having some familiarity to it will allow me to set even more specific goals when it comes to doing it the next time. Because when you do anything for the first time, you can train for it all you want. And I will say that the one thing I will train for differently in doing it in the future is just put more of an emphasis on running, because that's also something I'm not as comfortable with. It's not something I look forward to that much. And maybe I'll be sitting here in 2025 saying that I do actually really like running, for as much as I joke about it right now. But when you are new to something, it's okay to set a slightly lower bar. It's okay to say, hey, my goal is to just complete this. If you're a competitive person, if you're a high achieving person, it's also okay to recognize that you may not feel like that's quote unquote enough for you. But as those thoughts were coming up for me, and again, this is what I loved about having a partner during the experience. We were literally talking about this. I said to my brother, like 4 years ago, I would have never been able to do something like this. And that's because I was in a headspace, forget the physicality piece of it. I was just in a headspace in my life where I had left my relationship, quit my job, moved back home. It was in the middle of COVID. I did completely stop training. I was extremely burnt out and I was in a really negative headspace. And if you had said to me, hey, we're going to go do this race, I would have said up and down, absolutely not. I refuse to do it. There's no way I'm going to do it. So my takeaway from this entire thing is, not only can I check the box to say that I did it, I have such a tangible measure of the mental growth that I have had over the last 4 years, regardless of what's happened on the scale, regardless of the numbers I put up strength-wise in the gym, regardless of the way my clothes fit. There is a huge element to being able to pat yourself on the back, to remind yourself that you can do hard things and actually go out and experience them and not think twice about it. I could have easily walked up into like the little start of the race and been like, I'm not doing this. And I would have never actually backed out in that moment. Like we were ready to go. But it was a full circle moment for me as I was running, specifically because I've never been somebody who really looks forward to running, that I willingly roped myself into this event that was more than 50% running. And I still had a lot of fun doing it. And it was grueling and it was tough. And again, I will say over and over that it was just so hot. But the mental growth that I've been able to see by pushing myself to actually go through with it is something that I am really proud of. And if you are someone out there who ever questions if you have the ability to accomplish something, that is what I think we overlook a lot in fitness. The fact that like pushing your body through things is just such a good reminder that you can literally feel. It's a physical reminder that you are capable of doing hard stuff. The second takeaway that I also had in the moment of the race that my brother pointed out to me was, we're in New York City. The skyline was right behind us. We're on the Hudson River, like literally at this pier, in arguably the greatest city in the world, one of my opinions. I think many people could agree with. It's gone through its phases. Doing this race with thousands of other people. And there's also like all this other stuff going on in this city. It's like this gorgeous day, the first day of June. We're moving into the summer and here we are. How cool is it? And I'll add to that, how lucky are we to be able to get to experience this and be able to move our bodies in doing it. When we were on our last lap, there was a woman who was in a wheelchair and she was going around the track and we passed her and we had like maybe a quarter of a mile to go. And I just said to myself in the moment, got to keep going. Like, this person chose to be out here. You chose to be out here because you have the capacity to move your body in this way. Give it everything you got and just keep pushing through. And it was really awesome. And even though I'm feeling really sore, I will, like I said, totally consider doing something like this again. Other random thoughts that I had about it in, preparing for it the next time, if anybody is considering doing something like this, little things like there is a little time chip that you have to put around your ankle. I would have definitely worn higher socks so that I could have put the time chip like wrapped over that, because it gave me a pretty gnarly blister that I was dealing with the entire time. So that was fun. But we still pushed through. I didn't even think about it until after the race. And make sure you stretch and move your body the next day. For as much as I was describing some of the soreness I was feeling today, and the day that I'm recording this, still got up this morning, stretched, went for a bike ride, kept it moving. The worst thing that you can do, and even if maybe you're not training for a race like this, but you may use this as a reminder, like of getting back into your fitness journey, or like maybe you took even just a few weeks off and you have those days where you feel really sore. You introduced a new type of movement and now you're feeling really sore. For as much as you may just want to sit and think that that's the best way for your body to recover, think of it like, you're putting a little WD-40 on it by actually moving your body. It does make a really big difference. It doesn't have to be anything strenuous. And when you put yourself through something like this, enjoy what comes next. And by that, I may mean rewarding yourself with a certain meal. I texted my nutrition coach right after, and he was like, what are we celebrating with for dinner? I had an awesome steak that I really enjoyed. Totally had some ice cream too. And it was awesome. And then I woke up today and was like, cool, let's get right back into our macros today. Let's still hit our protein today. And that's how you know that you've developed a really good relationship with food, because there's probably a version of me like 5-6 years ago that it would have said to herself, like, no, I need to try to be as consistent as possible with my nutrition. It's like, okay, wait a second. If the rest of your week looks super consistent, you can totally enjoy this meal and you can give yourself that ability to celebrate with food. Now, there's always a double-edged sword to that, in that we want to make sure that we're not constantly rewarding ourselves with food for certain things, especially when we have specific goals. But having been able over the last 3-4 years to develop an understanding for what it means to zoom out, again, something that we also teach to clients inside of the Fitness Fix, it's not about the minutia of meal to meal. It's about your ability to be consistent week over week, and in the span of a month, then month over month, and seeing what it really takes for you to be able to get those results. It's usually about checking the boxes, the classic 80-20, at least 80% of the time. That could look like 25 days out of the month. It could look like 22 days out of the month. But that's something that I've even visually started doing this year by having a calendar that I keep on my refrigerator and giving myself a check mark when I do hit my training and I do hit my nutrition. And then being able to take a step back at the end of the month and say, okay, let me literally stand here and count how many days did I hit and how many days was I off, compare that to the progress I've made. And then that gives me a really good picture for like what's reasonable. Like, are the goals that I actually have aligned with the way I'm behaving? Or do I need to reconsider the way that I'm behaving? So that's the update. For as crazy as the race sounded, would totally do it again. And yeah, if anybody has any questions about it and you guys want to know more about what it was like, I will certainly answer them. And that's all I have. So as always, from wherever you're listening from, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will catch you guys next week.